After last week's heated and controversial episode, we're going to try to calm things down. What is ship schematics? I don't even actually know. Is it you? Do you have the ships? That was easy. Aha! Ship schematics. Oh shit. Everything's fine. I'll just click slice and that's not slice and dice. Oh, that's cleave. Sneaky. Thank you, random dude, for helping, I guess. When did I get that move? They used the icon of slice and dice the rogue's head, which is a speed booster, but this one's just like completely different. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's a cleave. That's just all of your attacks hit additional people. That reminds me, there used to be a skill called cleave. I think it was that icon that used to hit additional target, and now it's not here. I don't know. Whatever. First question is from Josha Heirbaut. It's a really big paragraph. As pointed out by Robert Bellah and his co-authors, Americans have built on... We're not really starting off on another light question, aren't we? Americans have built on the earlier Puritan traditions of leaving home. In the early Connecticut, for instance, all young persons had to go through their own individual conversion, had to establish their own relation to God to be allowed full membership into the church. And this has grown into the American tradition of leaving home. The young person has to go out, to leave the parental background, to make her his or own way in the world. In contemporary conditions, this can transpose even into abandoning the political or religious convictions of their parents, and yet we can talk without paradox of an American tradition of leaving home. The young person learns the independent state, but this stance is also something expected of him or her. Moreover, what an independent stance... Oh, they said stance before too. Whoops. The independent stance. Moreover, what an independent stance involves is defined by the culture in independence, can also alter with time. I changed lines and it's a not the best second screen situation. I'm reading a little diagonally. Whoops. Moreover, what an independent stance involves is defined by culture in a continuing conversation. Yeah, that's the right line. In a continuing conversation to which that young person is inducted and in which the meaning of independence can alter with time. Nothing illustrates better than the transcendental embedding of the independence in interlocution. Each young person may take a stance which is authentically his or her own, but the very possibility of this is enframed with social understanding of great temporal depth, in fact, in a tradition. What do you think about this? Excerpt from Charles Taylor, Sources of the Self, page 39. I think that this question is essentially throwing a paragraph at me and then going, which isn't really a question. Or what you think of it is very open-ended. I guess this is the equivalent of a podcast topic. Oh, there's so much to unpack there. And to be totally honest, I latch onto the beginning part more than the actual part that I think is the body of the story, which is kind of not good. Because I'm definitely taking more from the fact that there's the intro about this idea that Puritan beliefs lead to this idea of needing to leave home and strike out on your own and everything like that, which is something that I was just taken for granted growing up, and I was just kind of aware of along the way. I don't think I understand this quest. Nobody attacked me this time? Ah, now I can go through his pockets. There we go. Growing up, though, I was always being told through my very conflicted parenting stuff like the equivalent of like, yeah, I have a mount. Stuff like how, like, when I was your age, I was working at this job, or I was a delivery boy, and I was already in my first marriage, and all these other things, and I'd already grown, walked out, and everything like that. And it's all, like, weird, confusing shit for a number of reasons. One of which was because I was being raised to have a different life than my parents had, so the idea of comparing them directly when the whole goal is to not have the same life was a weird comparison. I was always... I don't know, I think my dad just doesn't think those kinds of things through, so he'll just talk about stuff in those terms, and like and I don't even know if he thinks it all the way through. Of like, if you talk to your children that way, the only interpretation they can reasonably have is that you see their current state as some kind of failure because they're not rising to the standards that you apparently have set, because you're comparing your life with theirs as a metric of the things they're not doing, which is inherently an implication of failure, which is a real weird thing to do when you're like raising your kids to go to college and have a completely different life and everything. It's like, which one do you want? But it was always kind of, because of that kind of stuff and because of a lot of American stuff, it was always just kind of assumed that like there's this whole system of moving out when you come of age and going out and getting a wife or whatever, and, you know, getting the family you're supposed to have and getting the job, the career, the big word career, not just a job. And it's like there's such a specific plan. There's 2.5 kids and a dog in a suburban neighborhood, that kind of crap. It's this weird cookie cutter expectations of success and what your life's supposed to be. And an interesting part of growing up as a millennial is that that kind of stuff is by and large insanely unrealistic. In part because of the economic crash of 2008, massively changing dynamics, the world that baby boomers set up for us, and so on, and a number of other things we talked about in this Q&A series. There's a huge number of reasons why I'll probably never actually experience the concept of suburban malaise, because it's going to be a long time before I can even get my own apartment, let alone anything else, like one that's just mine and not a roommate situation, because basically everyone in my generation that I know lives with other people, and that other people is not their wife. That's a whole interesting thing. Oh, strike a deal with you. There we go. Got it. Where am I going with this? I'm trying to articulate this on the fly. This is a little complicated to improvise. But, well, oh yeah, the thing that was interesting to me is that this is like an American assumption. Or at least an American white people assumption, because I do have to specify that kind of crap. My specific subculture within the United States, which is unfortunately the kind of thing that a lot of people treat as the default when it really isn't, and is increasingly becoming less so. But it's treated as the default American experience when it's in fact not. But the increasing thing I'm learning is that I learn about other cultures outside of the United States in particular, and how the idea of striking out is like a foreign concept to them. Literally, I guess, because we'd be the foreign and it's our concept. Which is, it's interesting to think about things that are treated as an assumption, as basic progression milestones in life, as just not being that way. Like, hearing about like the Japanese like family home and stuff like that when I'm reading Junji Ito comics or other sources, because I don't exclusively learn things from comic books, but it is one way to encounter some of these things, is just like the idea of multiple generations living together in a house, and that being the standard for a society in a lot of different countries, as opposed to kicking the kids out to find their own place. It's kind of an inherent thing that's kind of a, I don't know, it's like an assumption that's caused because of perhaps of the expansionist nature of the United States, the idea that there's just this giant country and you're supposed to go out among it, like the idea that like when people were when the government was distributing land and stuff like that, there was the idea that like you have land races where you would have everybody would show up and you would have a very literal race in order to stake out a particular land, and that's going to be the livelihood of your future and your family and stuff like that. Like that's the kind of crazy difference that comes out, is whether or not you manage to get to a spot fast enough when under a time limit and things like that. Like the idea of just going out and getting and moving forward and outward in American society is just a fundamental difference, because it's seen as this infinite expanse, and it feels like it oftentimes with the massive drives you have from place to place. I can't find this thing. And also, this entire answer is a mess because I don't know what to do with this. I don't. Oh, I was supposed to be clicking on this. I was trying to find the interactive spot and I couldn't find it. There we go. Oh boy, that's gonna be dramatic. But right now we're having this. This is actually timely. Right now we're having a bit of a culture shock because of the fact that assumption's being challenged by the fact that by the economic realities of our current society and how things have been for a decade. Like, it's really hard to think of it as being a brief thing anymore that's going to go away if it's been there for an entire decade. Many of us for our entire adult lives, the current status that America has and what the reality of whether or not you can reasonably achieve lives like that. And so more and more, it's like, it's been really frustrating because it's always contextualized as millennials are killing this industry, and millennials are lazy and stubborn and don't make enough money or whatever the hell. And it's like, it's so many weird interpretations when it's really like millennials are working, in many cases, 2 jobs so they can live a meager existence. And like, everything's fundamentally changed. And I think that's, to some extent, I think that's why there's anti-billionaire rhetoric that's becoming more and more prevalent and so on, and people are getting sick of hearing the shit about how we need to protect rich people and stuff like that, because in reality everyone works for a company that is run by a super rich person, and they're seeing that the trickle-down concept doesn't really work because of the fact that, like, things aren't getting better for them, but things keep getting better for the person that runs the whole thing, and so on and so forth. So that's gonna have to boil over at some point, potentially. Ew, tattooed pirate head. Great. I'm drastically off subject, but I barely had one to begin with. It's interesting trying to explain ideas like this, though. Like, hey, in a lot of societies, it's just really normal for multiple generations to live together, or for shared housing on a larger scale and stuff like that, because it's just not always economically feasible for every single person to live alone and separate and everything. We're just all waiting for this now. Yep, go ahead and get it. It's just gonna disappear now. Bye. Just hanging out. Waiting for respawn times. Is he just gonna stay here? Goodbye. But it's one of the things that's always interesting is being on a Reddit or Imager or just any other place that just lets people casually interact with each other that don't have the same background as each other, and just seeing people talk about stuff like this, just things that are inherently part of American culture and not questioned, like American gun culture or many other elements, really, the expansionist nature, the idea of always going out and striking out, like so many other aspects are like, there's so many societies that we share this space with, YouTube and Reddit and so on, or you just interact with people that are from different countries, and they're like, yeah, there just aren't guns around in my country, and your country terrifies me because of how everyone has guns. And it's like that, and like police behavior and the militarization of the police and so many other elements. Like there's so many parts where you get to look back at your own culture and recontextualize it and reframe it through other people's eyes when you see like someone from France or Germany or China or Japan or anywhere looking at your culture and like just kind of raising the idea that things that are inherent assumptions about your culture might be getting taken for granted needlessly. The idea that there's things in your society that you see as being fundamental or always true, and you've never really questioned the idea of having something else, and then seeing completely different people have completely different perspectives on that stuff, and how that can just kind of rock the idea of like, oh, what? That's why do we have it that way? Why were things that way? And that's really hard to it's really hard concepts to explain to like your parents and stuff like that, because they've at that point lived in said society forever, and in many ways they've figured out or found themselves in a situation where they benefit from the current system, and so they're less likely to question it, whereas people that are struggling with said system are way more likely to be willing to actually question it, because they're like, wait, hang on a minute, this rule set isn't working. It seems to be promoting suffering or illegitimately and unevenly distributing happiness, basically. And the promise of the American dream that you're raised with is constantly being just kind of stepped on, because none of it seems to actually represent what you were grown up to hear about. You hear about things like the American dream and the invisible hand and these other things they teach you that just explain how society is supposed to work, but then we find that in reality perhaps none of our actual society seems to match the ideals that we were told to be. And it's weird, because if you challenge any of this stuff, you yourself are seen as being un-American. It's like, how dare you question this? You millennials are so unpatriotic and un-American, and why don't you just move to another country and stuff like that. But half the time the things being brought up are like actually reaffirming American ideals more accurately. Like I recently posted the quote on the Statue of Liberty on my Facebook because of the migrant crisis happening right now that shouldn't have been a crisis, but it has been, which is that people are coming here from terrifying places to seek asylum because they're in danger and their families are in danger, and so they're coming here in order to escape that danger. And like and that's the promise that our country is supposed to have, this idea of it being a better place, and we proudly use the icon of the Statue of Liberty to represent ourselves, and we sell the merch everywhere, and it's seen as one of the symbols that you're supposed to be proud of in this country. But but somehow you're the bad guy if you think about actually upholding the ideals that said Statue of Liberty represents. And like, that's let's bring that quote up, because that's nice. Nice little reminder of what we pretend to be. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. That's supposed to be American, right? But now people are in danger and in horrible situations, and it's oftentimes the very countries that we overthrew the governments of and ruined the lives of the people therein, and we have our own responsibility, even ignoring the whole like promise of what America's supposed to be. We also additionally have a direct responsibility in that we've often caused many of the problems that these people are refugees from, and still, like, people will just close their doors. It's been really depressing. I've been watching as like the entirety of the Western culture becomes a bunch of fucking cowards, and they're depressing me, because people are in trouble and they're in danger, but because they're brown, all of these European countries and the United States are trying to keep them out. And they tell us these horror stories about how they're going to get us, they're going to get your kids, they're going to get your wife. And it's like, that's always been a racist way of framing it. The idea that foreigners are coming here to get your wife and get your women and your children has always been like a really fucked up way of contextualizing immigration. And it's like, no, these people don't care about you. They're trying to get away from dangerous stuff. It's not an organized invasion of terrorists. It's people fleeing danger, doing exactly what you would do in their situation. And it's like, and not to mention the double think of the idea of like, if I or people like me suggest that, hey, maybe something needs to be changed, or maybe we're wrong about something here in this country, the first response is, why don't you move out of the country then if you hate America so much? But then these people are fleeing their country and they're like, why don't they stay and fix it? It's like, we don't want, that's not the advice you give the people in your own country. That's an interesting contradiction right there. Apparently this is just going to be really political episodes for a while. Hooray. It's hard not to be thinking about politics because, lo and behold, it's the, we just had the midterm election here in the United States, so every time you open a window, politics just comes blowing in everywhere. Hooray. And it's all that you can be exposed to for a while. So it's hard not to be thinking about this stuff, but also I've been so confused because I've talked to my own parents about these kinds of things and a lot of other people from older generations and other political alignments, and yeah, the ongoing narrative is that they are a debate. I mean, sorry, is that they are an invasion of foreign immigrants that are coming in illegally and they're a danger to us and stuff like that. And it's like, and they want our benefits. They want to just live off the welfare state. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. I'm like, no, they're refugees. And refugees have been a thing for a while now, and we make a lot of them. And it's been pretty standard and acceptable. In fact, we signed treaties to allow refugees and for people to seek asylum. It's kind of part of how our world internationally is supposed to work, is that we sign these treaties about accepting refugees, because otherwise how fucked up is the world when people can't escape war-torn countries and crime syndicates that decapitate people and save their children. But apparently we're not good enough for that because we're cowards. And then the idea that, like, immigration, like, immigrants into America contribute to the economy more than they take from it. That's true. And it's like, but none of that information matters because it's more important to be told things. And it's hard not to think a lot of it's racist because of the actual, because it feels like it's always the brown countries. Like, immigration comes in from all sorts of other countries and nobody even questions. Nobody's wondering how many Welsh immigrants might be coming to the United States illegally every year or something. Like, it literally doesn't even occur to people to even think about that for a moment. Like, it's not that hard. You just take a plane into the United States and then you just don't go back. Like, it's actually not, like, the idea of immigrating illegally in a lot of cases isn't even that completely insane. But we just don't even question it because they're not brown. Seems to be the thing. And of course the most infuriating thing I saw recently was that time where there was like CNN doing an interview. Wait, are we doing this right now? That's not nice. CNN was doing an interview with somebody that was like, I don't care about them immigrating, that's fine, I just don't want them to do it illegally. And they're like, well, you know, seeking asylum is actually legal. And then the woman responded, well, I hope Trump fixes that. And I'm like, okay, so you just dropped the pretense immediately that you just hate the brown people and don't want them here and don't actually care about whether they're entering the country illegally. And that's been the unfortunate underpinning, is that it always feels like when I talk to people in real life that, like, their reasons are way more fucked up than they're willing to admit, because their logic and the arguments they pose don't hold water. And the only thing I can think of is that those are just weak arguments being thrown up to defend what is their emotional gut reaction to the situation, that either they are hiding or they don't fully understand. And that stuff gets really worrying. It's, hey, we're supposed to be better than this. And it's like, and if you're worried about what this is going to do to the economy, well, Trump just spent like $200 million so that he could put troops along the border to just be a giant middle finger to those potential immigrants. Just to be like, no, stay out. That's $200 million. They weren't going to cost us $200 million if they got in. So, like, it's not even an applicable response. And as far as I can tell, the real reason for all this isn't because of a real threat. It's because the midterms were coming up, and Trump was at risk of losing the House and the Senate, and so he was going to become a lame duck president, and it was going to be on his own. And he's certainly not going to build a wall at that point. So what he did is he came up with a scary thing. Oh, a migrant caravan? Even though migrant caravans have been coming to the United States forever, and this is not even remotely a new thing to happen, even though it might be a big one. Well, that sounds like a good boogeyman. And so it's perfect, because you know what the thing about this thing is, it was weeks away. It wasn't going to reach the United States for weeks. That meant he could scare everybody and call it an invasion, and they could make up stuff like, there's Muslim terrorists in that caravan. They could just say anything they wanted to, and fuck reality, right? And just keep saying scary things about this caravan, these invading brown people coming from the south, which you know he can mine that particular course, because he himself won the election in part by promising to build a wall between us and them. So he knows that the people, at least some section of his audience, is really big fans of this idea of being afraid of Mexico, basically. So he drummed up that same fan base to go on like this, saying, oh, it's the invading evil people, and it's worse, they're Mexicans and they're Islamic terrorists all in one, and they're men and criminals. He sure as hell won't acknowledge the women and children and so on. And we're gonna spend $200 million to deploy the military down there to keep them out, because they're such a threat, those people that are legally seeking asylum. Like, it became such a shit show that people on his own side were straight up like, hey, what the fuck? This is literally not legitimate. It was distressing. But like, it didn't matter what the result was going to be. It didn't matter. Like, from this point on, what happens in this crisis isn't actually as important anymore. Because the important thing is that he could be really loud about it, because he could be really loud about it up until the midterm election happens, because that would be when it would affect who voted. If he could scare enough people on his side to vote certain ways and keep control of the parts of the government that he wants to keep control of, then that's a victory. And he would never, much like the whole question of like building the wall and stuff like that and things that he claims he's going to do, he never had to actually follow through with this in its entirety, at least not in the short term. Because it was going, no matter what happened, the caravan wasn't going to reach the United States border until after the midterms were over. So it's like, it's a gift egg, something to just yell about and be scared about. And that's his MO, is scaring people, and then also telling them that they're the real Americans, and we'll just all ignore all of the tenets of American society and all the things that we tell our children that are supposed to be great about us, because we've never really lived up to that shit, is the honest thing. The country I was told I was growing up in has never, I've never found it I've never observed it in real life, and it's been really distressing. And so that's just been a whole mess. Yeah, that's, you sound nice, dude. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed another political episode. That's apparently how I flail. I did want to talk about that though, because it's just, it just bothers me. I feel like we're cowards now. I feel like we're cowards. Go away. And we don't want to, like... I've just been sad lately, whenever I think about anything besides just Let's Playing, because of this kind of stuff. And it'd be interesting to hear the responses. I don't know. I spent the last episode talking about global warming being real, and got multiple comments about how people massively disagree with me, which is... Admittedly, a lot of topics were covered, so maybe they were talking about other stuff. They were very vague about it. I'm not really into getting into big political arguments right now, mainly because in many cases I've already said what I want to say, and arguing back and forth mostly won't go anywhere. And I've also been reassured by the You Are Not So Smart podcast that unfortunately arguments are useless and nobody ever changes their mind. Which is a point of away from the idea of why I should ever even discuss some of the stuff, I suppose. Because it's useless. I don't know. Blah. I don't know. Really, a lot of the time I just feel, when I look at my own country's behavior, all I can think is I keep voting against these things that keep happening. It's not working, but that's what I keep doing. Because, yeah, we're using chemical weapons on children. Like, we've done that. You know, the same year, we were also keeping children in... Remember when we were keeping all of our children in, the immigrant children in concentration camps? Then we were using chemical weapons on them, and I'm like, this is... all because we're afraid of letting them in the country. I just... Oh, holy shit, man. Yeah, I actually banned someone from the Discord for the first time. Because I'm getting really tired of the casual dismissal of this kind of stuff. Like, I've only banned 2 people from the Discord ever. One of them was somebody who was literally spamming, like they were using like scripts or bots or something to make Discord literally unusable by massive spam. And then there was somebody who was this recent person who was just introducing condescending political topics. And when it comes to like gun issues or immigration issues where like actual children are dying or having weapons used on them, and you're being like using memes about it or dismissing it and being condescending about it, seriously, like if you're gonna be on the opposing side from me on these topics, you could at least give the topic its proper respect, because Jesus Christ, people are dying. But people don't talk like that, because people don't process it as people are dying, because they come up with reasons to subvert why it matters that people are dying, because that helps them live with the idea that their own argument is correct, as if they belittle or dismiss the actual stakes of the supposed argument. So when children are having weapons used on them, you tell yourself, oh, you other them in some way. If somebody is killed by a cop and that person did not commit a crime and that person did not do anything wrong and was not even attacking anybody or anything, but they're killed by a cop anyway, the first thing the media does is drag that person's reputation through the mud, go through their Facebook profile, find any questionable photo they can do, and just try to muddy the waters about that person as much as possible in order to create this narrative that they somehow deserve to die for that, as in an extrajudicial killing from the police, for not committing a crime and not posing a threat, which is happening right now. There was a shooting somewhere in Alabama, and they got the wrong guy because he happened to own a weapon, and so they shot him and killed him, and he was not the shooter, and he was not posing a threat. He was running away from the scene of the crime, because that's what people do in most cases during shootings, and he was shot and killed, but he was a bystander. And it's like that, and the first thing people are doing is they're going through and they're coming up with reasons why that guy was a bad guy, or oh, was he dismissed from the military in a bad way or something? Was he disorderly in the military or something? Because they're going into his military background and trying to come up with excuses for anything they can come up with that might be him being bad. Does he have a questionable Facebook photo? Was he discharged from the military? Anything else? It's like, it doesn't matter. He was killed by the police for not committing a crime. Like, he was literally just killed at random one day by the people meant to protect him. What the fuck is this world where we try to come up with reasons why people that are killed for no reason deserve it? And that kind of stuff goes on, where it's like people come up with reasons why these children deserve to have chemical weapons used on them, or whenever violence takes place with children, we come up with it to the point where people fictionalize entire narratives about what happens with them. And it's like I was blown away recently when, like, there was the there was the Muslim children at a school that were being assaulted by other children, and right now there's somebody being sued because it was like this political pundit asshole dude that like straight up makes up narratives about how like these children are actually they were the aggressors first, and there's roaming packs of violent Muslim children in that school and stuff like that. And it's like, who's the person saying this stuff? Some random asshole on the internet that has a following for being a hate monger. And because it's convenient to him and he profits from it, he'll just fabricate entire stories about the evil Muslims to the point where everybody is like, what the fuck are you doing? And that's profitable. It's reality doesn't matter, because people have their versions of what they want to have be true, and so they'll do that. I definitely often feel lucky that I'm a white guy in the United States, because Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. The idea of just being killed one day, and then then my family having to go through this massive circus of people inventing reasons why I deserved it, is next level. And I'm sorry everyone, because I have no idea how we even got here, to be honest. We might have to stop having political related questions altogether, even though it's hard not to. It's because it's what people are thinking about. I don't know how I'm the bad guy. I've been the bad guy a lot. Like, in my family and people I know, and even if somebody finds out my opinions online, I'm very often the bad guy. But like, all I'm advocating is increased empathy and people caring about each other and not actively treating everyone as the enemy. And that's hostile and unreasonable, and I thought we were better than that, and it's what I was taught all my life to be like, even by the own people that raised me, who themselves will not listen to this kind of talk. Are like, they supposedly raised me to be like this, and my country told me to be like this, and then it's unacceptable apparently, because the people that say everything that isn't that are the ones winning the elections. And I'm looking at all of the Western world during these times of crisis, and everyone's just being a series of closed doors, and it's depressing. It's depressing to not only know that like Nazis are literally back, and Charlottesville was a thing that actually happened. If you haven't seen it in detail, like Charlottesville was not just like some misunderstood right-winger people. Like, those were literal neo-Nazis going around with actual like Nazi flags and alternate Nazi flags, the ones that they use to like hide that they're Nazis by having like slightly less Nazi-like things, but that's the only possible interpretation of those flags, is because they're unified, organized flags that go below that level. If you've ever found yourself excusing the Charlottesville stuff at all because you're right wing or something, and you just thought, you just by default, that was your gut reaction, and you haven't really analyzed it, seriously look at that stuff. Like, really look at it. There's actually there's like a giant ass documentary style breakdown of that stuff on Sean's channel. It's just SHAUN, of the Charlottesville situation, and I mean, they gave us the evidence. Like, it's not like a spin or out of context. It's literally hours of footage provided to us by the people that did it. Straight up Nazis just marching down the streets of the United States, and they're YouTubers. So many of them are YouTubers. They're in my community, and it's revolting to me. And they're fangirling over whether or not they're going to get to meet the leader of the KKK and stuff like that. And we know all this because it's not hearsay, it's not dialogue, it's not rumors, it's literally their streams, because these idiots were live streaming the event while they were doing it, while they were saying these things and revealing their true colors. And it's like, it's some of the ugliest shit, and it's real, and it's modern, and it's happening in my country, and I do not know how to process it. It's like all I can think about sometimes, and I just escape to my video games and my Let's Play worlds to not think about it, basically, for large periods of time. And it's very easy to be in a bubble where I just sit in my little 10 by 10 room in my obscure neighborhood and just do my job every day and not think about this stuff and just consume Netflix media and not process the outside world. But I keep getting sucked back into it because it's just, I can't ignore it, because it's not just that, it's not that it's just that it's bad and that I can't do anything about it, but in many cases, but also that I'm surrounded by people that don't even acknowledge its existence. And that stuff's terrifying, because you can just look at it and it's right there. But because of the modern media systems and so on, everybody finds their way into their own private section of the media that just tells them what they want to hear. And they literally hear entirely different narratives of what the world is like and what's happening in it. And so their realities are entirely different. It's like when I bring up the idea of like, hey, seeking asylum is a legal process, like that kind of concept. People just, the conversation more or less just shuts down, because you can't get people that are opposing that idea to even acknowledge the fact that it's legal, because of the fact that they're not prepared for that idea. Because nobody's been preparing them for that idea. They've just been denying it and pretending it's not a part of this conversation. And so like a lot of the stuff, the moment you talk to somebody that disagrees with you on these subjects, you're blindsided by a completely different reality with different rhetoric and different entire systems of dealing with the stuff that you've never had to deal with yet before. And so like it's a real learning experience to actually talk to the other side about a lot of these topics and find out that like, oh, how could they possibly tolerate a bunch of these things? Oh, because reality is utterly different for them, basically. Because they, via Fox News and other things, they just are fed a different world as a result. And that... I keep trying to change the subject and I keep going. I wonder how many people are going to keep watching this series, or if I'm like sabotaging it now at this point. I don't know. Part of me at times becomes aware of the idea that like I have an expanding audience. Like I went to a high school that was 2,000 people, and I currently have more than 60,000 subscribers on YouTube. And it's hard not to think about like what that might mean. And so like the idea of staying entirely apolitical often feels damaging if the status quo is not in a positive place, because then it's almost like you're passively giving your approval of all the darkness that's happening right now. And also, you can't really use arguments that like, oh, entertainers shouldn't be political and whatnot, because we keep electing entertainers as our governors and our presidents, between Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump and Arnold Schwarzenegger and others. Like, these people are becoming political leaders, these entertainers. So it's like, when you elect a reality TV show star to run the United States of America, it's really hard to still stick to this idea that entertainers should not be political at all. And I also get really deeply troubled when people make assumptions about me that are wildly out of vogue with what things are. Like when people think I am conservative, or somebody asked if I was MGTOW, men going their own way, and other stuff like that. Like really distressing groups of people that I would never be associated with. And it's like, but if you don't say anything, then that can often lead to people just making assumptions based on any random piece of information they think they can get. Sometimes even just like a random joke you make, or some other offhand line that's misinterpreted. And to contextualize how misinterpreted you can be, like there's a really good example of like, somebody once thought that I was shaming people for getting C-sections. And I was like, what? Like I had to unpack that one and figure out what the hell they were talking about because I was very confused where that conclusion came from. And it was during the Witcher 3 playthrough. So even more confusing where how that came up. But I went back and it was just random scattershot pieces of inner monologue that I had while I was doing the Let's Play. And those were just interpreted in the worst possible way, basically. So like there was I was just walking down the road of Skellige, the one road in Skellige, and there was a woman that was like, "Hey there, handsome, want to see my scars?" And I was like, okay. Well, internally you're thinking like, okay, it's a little bit of a play because I think she said more like, "I want to see my scars," and it's a bit of like a bit of like an internal like it's a play on Geralt because Geralt has scars all over his face, so it's like, "Oh, I want to see my scars, handsome," and my first reaction was, "Ugh," which is a pretty normal response to somebody randomly hitting on you on the street, let alone somebody randomly hitting on you while talking about relatively morbid aspects while in doing so. And a significant age group, because she seemed more like 70 or 80 hitting on Geralt or something. But you know, you do you, I guess. And then I was like, wait, did she mean like a C-section? And then I moved on. Like I literally didn't give another thought to it. But because I had the closely associated thoughts of EU and C-section, even though the order of operations is wrong there, because I thought the EU first, then thought C-section later, and then moved on. Because of that, I was seen as shaming people who get C-sections, and it's like, no, especially like if it's like a matter of like your safety and stuff like that, like, no, I'm not shaming anything, Jesus Christ. But that's the kind of stuff that happens when you're doing this stuff. There's a weird amount of pressure that comes on from that kind of stuff because you can represent certain things and so on. It's like, it's one of the reasons why I felt the need to at times challenge Andrew when he brings up things on the channel, because like we're in the middle of a thing and he'll just be like talking about like traps or something, and I'm like, I mean like, we know trans people, and it's like, that's a really fucked up concept to bring up and everything. The idea of like a trap is like a really worrying thing. It's like, oh yeah, trans people are just this thing that's designed to trap men, as opposed to, you know, people trying to find happiness in their life and so on like that. It's like the things that I leave unsaid often feel like they have more negative consequences than saying things. But saying things is difficult too, because you're afraid of alienating your audience, both because you rely on their viewership in order to get ad revenue, and also because you rely on their patronage in order to pay your rent on an even grander scale. And so like these controversies are at times dangerous. Like last episode, somebody said, wow, you and I really disagree on a lot. And lo and behold, I opened the dashboard on Patreon and they had left my Patreon. So like, this Q&A series has had, at the very least, its first casualty, and in that me expressing controversial opinions leads to people withdrawing their Patreon support, because hearing alternate views is something that people are against. And I don't know which way it is, because people are often vague about this stuff. People could withdraw their support because it's just not what they're here for. The idea of being challenged or thinking about these different things or encountering different perspectives. Or it could be that they think they're going to hurt me because, like, oh, you are of this other group, I need to damage you by removing your support. I don't know. It might be that the moment that I expose my beliefs, suddenly that person can't consume any of my content anymore because in the background they know the things that I think now and so on. But at the same time, like, is that a worthy cost? Because people, I don't know. I think on some level, I feel like gay people and trans people and other groups that go through a lot, them feeling safe and accepted in my audience is more valuable to me than whether or not people that might have trouble with that stuff might feel challenged by me. It's like at some point, it's like I'd rather be accepting of one than the other, and so on. It's one of the things that comes up when I think about stuff like even it's a lot of stuff's inherently political. Like I talk about like pathologic is about straight up ideologies fighting each other and stuff like that. Or even when you play a BioWare game, you have the choice of like, do I do a straight or gay romance and stuff like that. And for me, the question isn't really that heavy because of the fact that it's a video game. So it really doesn't matter to me that much whether or not my video game character's romance directly matches up with my own belief system in that way, because I can really go either way. In a lot of ways, I feel there's I almost said asexuality. That's not quite right. There's almost like a lack of gender or a lack of weight to gender to some extent to me in video games, because of like it's abstracted as a concept. It's like the idea of playing as a female character. It's like I mean, it's not like I'm getting the authentic female experience if I play as a female character, and similarly like the idea of which romance you go with is a thing. But like when I'm building up to the choice on that kind of thing, there is this pressure from the audience to go one way or the other and to do different things. And like, and yeah, I remember getting comments like, don't you go doing any gay shit when I was doing Dragon Age Inquisition, because Iron Bull was this fun character, and I was like, I kind of want to see what those scenes are like and stuff like that. And there was people like, don't you go doing gay shit. And I'm like, Jesus. It's like, you have to confront this stuff whether you try to or not, basically. And so that's part of the reality of a growing audience, and that's going to be an interesting thing going forward, figuring out what the hell to think about this stuff. Because like, as time goes on, my audience is only getting larger. When I started my YouTube channel, or even when I was doing Dragon Age Inquisition, where I was already getting political pressures about what decisions to make in my video games, I had a tiny audience back then. My audience is... How are there mud tracks up here? My audience is huge now, compared to that. And if I continue to scale the way I want to, it's only going to get larger. And that's going to be the kinds of questions I have to grapple with and come up with my own answers for, I suppose. And some of you are going to get mad along the way and whatnot. And that's just something I have to deal with. And it's not avoidable. I don't think... At this point, almost all YouTubers end up being... On some level, they have to make some kind of political decisions at some point. And it's because the... I feel like the expectation that reality, that entertainment and politics can be inherently separated to be kind of flawed, because of the fact that, like, politics is life. It's about what's happening in life and what is right in life and so on. It's like separating, it's like asking somebody who's religious to separate their entire life from their religion. It's like, yeah, but that religion is how they lead their life, like that kind of issue. And there's a certain responsibility, I think, when you have a large platform of what you say and what you do. And it's like, I have my own decisions, I suppose, that I've made. And they might even seem contradictory or weird. Like, one of them is that, like, I do not self-censor, and I swear all the time, and I don't really care. And that's just a choice. And it's that's just a thing, is that I will openly swear and use language and whatnot. But you'll notice which swears I use. And you'll notice how I talk. Like, I have this vulgar mouth, supposedly, but at the same time, like, you won't hear me. I've got to look into this damn quest. What do you want from me? No, open the quest. Yeah, oh, somebody's supposed to have the key, so I just need to have the right unit spawn. You'll notice that I won't use gendered or racial or, like, targeted insults, for example. Like, that is... I can't even call it self-censoring, because I literally don't have the thought to use them. Like, stuff like the C word, which, you know, Australia's favorite word, and things like that, which here is a very, very much worse thing. Like, that stuff's just out of my vocabulary. And... I don't, this is the most aimless episode ever. I'm just meandering at this point. But I don't... I'm incredibly tempted to just delete this entire recording and start a new one. I've just said a bunch of things. I think one of the takeaways is that I have no idea what I'm doing, but I think about it a lot. Like a lot. Like a lot. I'm supposed to use it on you or something? How do I use the ignition key? This is a uncharacteristically confusing quest to do when you're not paying that close attention by the standards of the game. Ow, stop it. I'm just gonna go turn the other thing in. Yeah. I need to reread the question to recontextualize what the rest of it was even about at this point. I can't find what to do with this quest. I'm gonna move on for now. I'll probably make it. I'm not gonna make it. I'm not gonna make it. I'm gonna die. Alright, well that'll make it easier to read the rest of the question, I suppose. That got weird. I was fixated on the whole beginning part about America's fixation with this, this reportedly Puritan idea of moving out. Although I think I might have covered some of the stuff on accident, basically. And yet we can also talk about the paradox of American tradition of leaving home. The young person learns the independent stance, but the stance is also something expected of him or her. Moreover, what an independent stance involves is defined by the culture, in a continuing conversation into which the young person is inducted, and in which the meaning of independence can also alter with time. Nothing illustrates better than the transcendental embedding of independence and interlocution. Each young person may take up a stance which is authentically his or her own, but the very possibility of this is enframed in the social understanding of great temporal depth. In fact, it is in tradition. It seems like the rest of it's basically talking about the contradiction between the idea of, like, you're expected to step out and reject your own parents' beliefs and way of life, but the process of moving on and rejecting your own family's way of doing things is itself a tradition, which means that that part is contradictorily not being rejected because that keeps happening and so on. And I don't know. Here's a really weird thing about my political upbringing and so on, and my religious upbringing, is that I didn't have one, basically. I learned about the United States in school, our history, our Constitution, our slavery, our Civil War, our war for independence, our ideals that we propose for ourselves, and how those ideals have never been true historically, in that they're always selective in what they mean. Like, all men are created equal, says the slave, you know, the slave owners and stuff like that. Like, these inherent contradictions that the things that we say about ourselves have never been entirely true, and that's the struggle I'm dealing with right now, with the idea that, like, we idolize the Statue of Liberty, and it's the Star of New York, and it's such a big thing. It's one of the top icons you would refer to of the entire country, and how we don't seem to believe in its very ideals. And as far as religion goes, it just didn't come up. I was not introduced to religion really as a child, and it never came up. And so now when I look at it as an adult, I'm just kind of confused by it and its existence. And we've had some unpleasant conversations where I'm not actively hostile, but people get hostile if you talk to them about their religion, even if they brought it up, which is that I'll have extended family members, because my direct family is not religious. I'll have extended family and other people sort of try to recruit me into Christianity and stuff like that, and they will pose these strange arguments and claims, and then I'll respond in kind with my interpretation of what they're saying, in usually just a genuine attempt to even understand what they're talking about and what they mean. And the ensuing conversation will go very poorly in many cases. Oftentimes because I'll propose a concept that they maybe haven't had to think about before, and that makes them angry in many cases. And then things kind of shut down at that point, and maybe they'll come back with another salvo later, and so on. Like I remember I was talking about the concept of sin once, and specifically it was my very religious grandfather bringing it up in his own context, because he's trying to, you know, make me think the way he does, I guess. And I had to wonder, like, well, Jesus only showed up at a certain year, right? So, like, what happened to everybody before that time? Like, how do you explain the salvation or lack thereof of everyone before the time where Jesus came by to tell everybody how to religion correctly? And he proposed this idea that people were... their ignorance essentially defended them. It was like this idea that being ignorant of the systems essentially made them exempt from the rules almost, or they were like judged on a different metric or something like that. And it's like, but then after Jesus came, then it was like, now the onus is on you to actually do things correctly or something like that. And so I posed what I thought was a very obvious question of like, okay, well then why did Jesus do that then? Because it seems like there was a system where people were not doomed, and then Jesus came by and introduced a system where people are doomed. Seems like inherently more people had a better afterlife before Jesus showed up than after Jesus showed up, if Jesus flipped on a switch where people are now judged and sent to hell and whatnot. This gets into the big murky waters of how you can't, if you put 5 Christians in a room, you can't get them to agree on whether or not hell even exists, and so on and so forth, because the religion is so fragmented at this point that there aren't really clear answers for any of this anymore. And I'm really not trying to shit on anyone's parade here. It's just I'm explaining my experience, is that I learned critical thinking before I learned about religion. And I got through college and so on, and for me, religion is just a curiosity. For me, there's nothing that separates the Norse legends of Thor and Odin from Jesus and so on. They're just not inherently more or less valid, because they're just stories that varying levels of people believe in. Between that stuff and like Scientology and so on, although Scientology genuinely seems to be like a parasitic, like nightmarish, evil cult that was designed by somebody to profit monetarily in modern days. So I don't want to put that, I don't want to list that aside with everything else. There's so much dark shit going on there. It's just been an outside thing. So like I actually went through all my time not being introduced to politics growing up. My parents didn't talk about politics. They didn't talk about religion. I only occasionally became aware that some of my extended family was Christian, and didn't really learn the extent of it, and was it ever brought up. And then by the time it was brought up, I was old enough that like I would ask them questions whenever they introduced it, which I know better than to introduce the subject. I will not start upon the subject, but if they bring it up, then I'll engage the way I engage in any discussion, basically, except it's not a discussion people like to have, so it goes way worse than most, even worse than politics, because a lot of people, when you say stuff that they don't agree with politically, they'll just clam up and not say anything back, basically, and the conversation just kind of ends. But if you disagree with somebody's political views, even though you're not even attacking them directly and you're just engaging in the conversation they proposed, it can very quickly go very dark, and that's been a bad time a number of times. Yeah. But what happened is I grew up, my parents got divorced around the same time I was becoming an adult and graduating high school. It was an eventful year, having all that stuff happen at the same time, finishing school, becoming a legal adult, and my parents splitting all simultaneously. And that's when politics started becoming relevant. And I don't know, I'm curious if it might be similar to what I'm talking about now. When I talk about the idea of having a platform and how it feels like you're in some ways responsible for discussing concepts and bringing things up at times. I need to drink water. That was way too long without water. Like I bring about this, I talk about this idea of like how it feels like you need to bring things up when the status quo feels wrong. And I kind of wonder if that's why I grew up in a non-political situation, is that there was a conservative president in our country for 8 years, from 2000 to 2008. And so what I didn't realize at the time is the most likely case is that my parents probably agreed with the leadership and therefore didn't question it, and therefore if they were in agreement with each other and with the government, then politics just kind of wouldn't come up, basically. But suddenly when Obama became president, suddenly politics started getting brought up all the time, like all the time. And suddenly I became very aware of my conservative parents, who I developed my own views of the world independently of, basically, because of the fact that, like, politics wasn't being brought up for my entire, like, ages 10 through 18 years of my life. So I just developed independently. So you can blame some of my politics less on my parents and more on Star Trek, I suppose, which certainly was helpful in the idea of accepting people and learning about different things and stuff. Which is a side note, oh boy, it's really weird when I go in the comment section of a Star Trek related video, like a video of essay about Star Trek or something, and people will be like mocking, like, oh, the next captain's gonna be like a no-legged trans black woman. It's like, are you mocking the idea that Star Trek like SJWs making Star Trek inclusive? Do you know the premise of Star Trek? Because that was the point. Gene Roddenberry from day one envisioned the entirety of Star Trek as this grand vision of the future where everyone lives together in peace, all different races and creeds, and like that's always been a beautiful thing. And it's cool because he was trying, because if you go through timelines and whatnot, there are stories written by that in that era that were more questionable by modern standards, but it's really important to understand that, like, he was trying super hard to be ahead of his time, and so, but he's still inherently of his time. So there's some vaguely weird on certain questionable parts about really early Star Trek, where you're like, okay, it's from the 60s. But like, he was trying really hard. That was the premise. But like now it's so weird to see like fans of Star Trek not understand the basic tenet of why it exists and stuff like that. But and it's weird because when my parents started expressing a lot of political things, and I started not agreeing with them, the common narrative would be that school was brainwashing me, which is a really weird concept. Because, like, why are you sending me to school if it's bad for me is a weird narrative. Like, you're raising me to go to college and you're sending me to school? That's a really weird thing to do if the school's brainwashing me, if you believe that genuinely. But also, like, I can't stress enough how much in all of high school and college, politics didn't come up. I just learned the subjects. I learned, and in fact, a lot of the political... Whenever I took a government class, the teacher was conservative, was actually the thing. And I don't see how learning physics is going to make me a libtard, as they put it. Now they put it. Well, they'd probably... Actually, well, I think I have seen them put it that way, but not talking about me, but and so on. It's amazing what people will say on social media publicly, knowing that the people that they're talking about will see them in their own family, and not associate the fact that they're talking about those people, like not think about that stuff. It's weird. Let's go ahead and hearth back, because I have nothing else to do up here, and I don't... Well, I can check again real quick for this quest, but I don't think I can do it. It seems like something's missing, or something I don't understand. Or am I... Yeah, there's a bunch of muddy tracks everywhere. Oh, there it is! Oh, shit! I just had to wait for it to spawn. But it'd be interesting to see if that was part of the... of what happened, ultimately. Yeah, oh, now I just gotta escort this guy. It'd be interesting to know if I grew up in a seemingly apolitical household because of the fact that politics were in favor of my parents' beliefs back then, and if my teenage years were full, if my young adult years were full of politics because of the fact that an opposing party to my parents was suddenly in control. Because I do notice that nowadays politics doesn't come up so much anymore, and it can't for these last 2 years, and I can't help but think if it's because, oh, it's because they agree with the person in control again, and that's just a really weird thing to think about. So maybe maybe I'm the crazy one now for thinking about being outspoken about any of this stuff, because I'm the one that feels like things are in trouble now, and things go back and forth. And it's really weird to grapple with, like, the inherent duality of that kind of stuff, like the idea that, like, looking at it on a grander scale as a system, but then still feeling the need to talk about it, even though you might think of it as an inevitable back and forth, because even though it might feel inevitable and maybe even pointless as a result, there's definitely things that feel like a genuine problem that are more important than that nature. I don't know. It was really weird watching my parents radicalize over the course of the Obama administration. I grew up in a house with no guns. Like, so I never was around guns. I wasn't exposed to American gun culture. It never came up. And I think guns are scary, because they're a machine created primarily, like, primarily created / iterated on and invented for times of war, to create mass slaughter. A lot of these things date back to World War II and so on, which was an era where millions of people were slaughtered wholesale for reasons that are at times terrifyingly close to what we're looking at now, with the elements of people actually being fascists again is a thing that's happening now. And I just mean the literal ones. I'm not talking about exaggerating past it and talking about, like, I'm not talking about the stereotype of, like, being hyperbolic and calling everyone a Nazi, but I mean, like, there's people who are actually fascists on a literal sense. And to some extent, they can hide behind the fact that they themselves, calling people someone a fascist is seen as hyperbolic. So, and the people that are actually fascists can hide behind that fact because no one will take them being called out as seriously. Time is money, friend. Which is inherently a weird thing too. I guess I just gotta head back again. But like I went from growing up in a household with no guns and inherently not liking guns, and I'm very nervous whenever I see them around. Like I don't like being around police officers that have an exposed pistol on their hip, because I'm just like, you're just walking around with a deadly weapon just all the time, and that's like, I inherently don't want to be in the room with those things because there's no upsides to it generally. It's just a thing that makes killing easier, which I find is a controversial thing to say, even though its literal intended purpose, but saying that is somehow contradictory or crazy. I don't know. But nowadays, both of my parents, independently, I'll remind you, because they're divorced and don't see each other anymore. They're both NRA members. National Rifle Association, the biggest gun lobby in the United States. And they're both in that group now. And that was a real weird change to see both of them take. And they're like hoarding guns. They have like a gun safe and stuff like that. And they collect guns and they go to gun shows, both of them. They go to shooting ranges. And I'm like, what happened? Like for 18 years, no guns. Then the moment that Obama's the president, and it became this really big talking point about how the liberals are going to take your guns, and that was what they were talking about constantly. Suddenly, people that didn't even have guns but agree with politically the people that are talking about the guns started buying bunches of guns. And I'm like, this is the weirdest fucking phenomenon to watch, and it's definitely an alarming change to watch among your own family. Like that's a real weird experience. A real weird experience. But this is all a long roundabout way of saying, in that I don't know what to say about the idea of rejecting your parents' traditions, because my parents honestly didn't feel like they had traditions for me to reject. My dad, let's see if I can think of anything. My dad was self-employed and had a stressful job where he had a bad barrier between, wow, that thing looks cool. Oh, look at you. Oh, you're a rare hunter pet or something, aren't you? Or is this whole zone full of that? Oh, this is some kind of high-level thing. Like the idea of my dad having a self-employed, stressful job that has bad work-life balance and so on. So far, I'm not doing a good job at rejecting that. Well, that wasn't what I was going for, but somehow I found my way into a distressingly similar thing. I think things are going pretty all right lately, though. Just thinking about, I don't know. That's when WoW really shows its age, is those mountains where it looks like an old level creator, the blob mountains. I do like the changing. The more steep it gets, the more the texture changes, because grass is less likely to live on the steeper slopes and whatnot, and the resistant rocks. One thing I can think of is that my parents drink, and I definitely rebelled away from that, I guess, as I don't drink. I don't have some kind of like not even once like prohibition of alcohol or anything like that where I'm terrified of it or anything, but I have never gotten drunk, and I avoid drinking more than like one thing at a time, and I drink like once every few months. I'll have like a drink like as a novelty, not for the purposes of getting drunk, but just to accept something that someone's offering me, or just get bored at a restaurant and try a thing on the menu the same way you do anything else on the menu. And I specifically limit myself and don't go any further and whatnot. And some of that's learned lessons from both family and friends, just watching people engage in self-destructive alcoholic behaviors, going down the terrible rabbit hole of becoming just seemingly being actual alcoholics, actual addicts, and so on, and engaging in something that doesn't seem to even bring them happiness, but only hurts them, but they do it out of habit or out of addiction or something. Onto other issues of like, alcohol's expensive, and also I'm not a big fan of the idea of mind-altering substances and the idea of not becoming myself. I like being in control of my faculties and knowing who I am and whatnot. And one of the scariest concepts about alcoholism, besides the part where you'll do stuff you don't mean to do, is the idea of blackouts. The idea that people, not only will they do terrible things, but they'll forget they did it. Like, I've actually been the guy who is sober around people who are drinking, and then one of them gets abusive to another person, and then I tell the person that did the shit in the morning, I tell them all the things they did. And I've actually led to people calling their spouses or their friends or whatnot, and on the phone, and apologizing to them for what happened, because at first they don't believe me when I'm talking to them about the actions that they themselves had been doing the previous night, and like that stuff. I've been the helping hand in that stuff enough times to not want to be the person who is the one doing that stuff, to risk the idea of losing control and being actually abusive, or just making mistakes that don't hurt other people, but just are mistakes themselves, even, that are outside of my control. Yeah. I value the way things are enough to not want to just make mistakes, I suppose. And I suppose I find that it doesn't have a place in my life. So like the gap of alcohol between me and my family might be one of the closer things to the idea of something that I rejected that my family does, but I'm still not, it might not be applicable though, because it almost feels like the idea of rebellion and rejecting of the traditions supposed by this quote is more about the idea of actually rejecting for the sake of rejection, whereas I have really specific life experience reasons for why I'm not really interested in alcohol, and I'm generally happy that I live in a household that does not have any nobody here has a drinking habit or a smoking habit or anything along those lines. Like, it's just nice. And I'm like, once it's not around and you're not being exposed to it, you start to question why anyone bothers at times. That's a whole thing. So I don't know. I don't really, my takeaway is kind of that I don't really have, oh, that thing's huge. I don't really have life experience to draw on to compare against the quote. The idea of rejecting familial traditions seemingly just for the sake of rejecting it, or even the idea of rejecting familial traditions at all. Because I kind of grew up outside of the idea of familial traditions, and instead, as I went on, it was more like how do I put this? It's mostly that, like, there didn't seem to be traditions when I was growing up. Look at the little guy. I'm trying to kill the ad. There we go. It felt like we don't have creeds. We don't have a religion. We didn't have this is how you're supposed to lead your life stuff going on. It was really that it was kind of like the idea that, like, my dad had his full-time job. My mom was raising us / helping with said job, like, back and forth. And my brother and I were pretty much left to our own devices with, like, a few boundaries. Like, we we pretty much spent our days like playing video games, reading books, whatever. And pretty much the requirements were just, we had to not fight with each other. We had to do our homework, you know, do school, and, you know, behave generally. And we're supposed to like ask permission and whatnot if you're going to go somewhere. You know, it was the generation where, with all the other contradictions always happening, like the idea like, why aren't you living my accelerated commitment life when also we raised you to go to college instead of doing what I did? Like there was also the contradiction of like, oh, you kids these days, you never play outside, but also that's coming from the same parents that wouldn't let you go outside because they were terrified you're gonna get kidnapped by child predators, because that was always being reported in the news. So like to the point where like there was arguments I had when I was like 17 years old about going to a LAN where I had to like fight for permission for that kind of crap because of level of like restrictiveness. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, I'm like 6 feet tall. Like, I mean, technically stuff can still happen to me, but I'm like there's the back and forth, the double think of like kids these days don't play outside, but also I'm parent of said kid and responsible for that behavior, but don't think about that for some reason, was always a thing. But yeah, there wasn't a lot of rules, and we weren't really taught morality. The closest thing to being taught morality by my parents, I felt, was more along the lines of just all the boundaries and rules and fight breakups and stuff just between me and my brother. Like the two of us interacting with each other and navigating that was like the closest thing to a rule set on how to treat people in general, which I guess that's one upside of having a sibling, is that you have to deal with other people from the get-go pretty much, because my brother's only 2 years apart from me, so we're especially after elementary school is over, pretty similar in age and type and whatnot. This is not a store, that's the bank. And so that played a role. But no, we didn't really have traditions to buck. So I didn't really have anything to subvert or change growing up. So I just kind of don't have an answer. But instead you guys get stories about me talking about how much that didn't impact my life, I guess. Yeah, no, I'm very different from my parents and think very differently from them. But it was all like revealed afterwards, like a surprise. Like instead of my ideologies or whatnot forming as a contradiction or a rebellion, they just kind of formed without me really questioning their existence at the time. And then over time, I just became aware retroactively of the fact that, oh, the things I think are different from the things that my parents think. That's weird. And then things get extra interesting and weird and convoluted when you take into the account of like, hey, my brother's gay and my brother's engaged and whatnot, and all these other aspects that go on. So like suddenly it's like you got this constant middle ground back and forth thing where it's like my parents are conservative, but they're from California. And I don't mean like they just live in California, they're from California. So while their particular Facebook groups and whatnot will always be like bemoaning how bad California is and so on, I don't think they know how conservative other parts of the world are if they get there. Like there's a certain like, it's a certain level of like tempered conservatism or whatever. It's like a little different. And also, yeah, like it's gonna be a real problem if you hate gay people and your own child is. So thankfully for my brother, our conservative parents that brought us up in California aren't like that. They might be confused by LGBT stuff, but they're not like hostile to it, so that's nice. Otherwise we could have had a very different, much more uncomfortable everything when stuff like that was going down. Yeah. Well, hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. I didn't. What am I doing? I'm sure next episode will be different. I'll pick the questions better to not be this way. I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the show's for, or what the guidelines are, or the boundaries, or what I should talk about. And I've only tangentially answered this question. No, I mean, I think I got into more of it. I don't know. I guess in some ways it wasn't a question. It was just a topic. So, yeah. Thanks for watching like always, guys. I don't know what to say because I made it awkward. Ask more questions in the thing. I'll try to make next week not like these last two, I suppose. I'm kind of hot on the heels of so much political stuff happening, though. Like, I guess I brought it up a few episodes ago, too. I was bringing up Trump and stuff like that. Was it the same episode or not? I don't remember if that was the same episode. But there was just the issue of, like, the fires were happening here in California, and our own president was being about it. And it's like, my sky is changing colors, and I can't go outside because the air's not breathable, and, like, genuine problems are happening, and I've been between the midterms and my state being on fire, and the border stuff happening all the time. Like, it's an especially inflamed time this month. Maybe things will be different in December when things have cooled down and the midterms are passed and the scapegoats people brought up in order to be angry and drive votes have run their course and whatnot. I just hope we come out the other side with something we can live with, and I don't know. I just constantly hope that we're not in the middle of another period of American history that we're going to be embarrassed about later and try not to talk about. Because, like, we keep doing it. Between the slavery and the Japanese internment camps and, like, so many things that we've done that are just worrying, like literal witch trials and McCarthyism and so many other elements of our history. I just really hope that we're not in the middle during this migrant situation of just creating another chapter that is going to be in history books that our parents don't want to talk about and so on. Because that just bums me out. People think about the history as the past, like it's our origin story, and that nowadays is separate and different. But like as Hank Green accurately put it recently, was that Hank Green or John Green actually? I don't know, somebody put it recently that like, yeah, right now there are people learning about 9/11 in history books in school. People who didn't experience it. Like that's how much time, like that's how quickly what's happening now becomes history. And I'm just bummed out by thinking about how some of this stuff's going to be written in the future when people in 2040 read about the Trump presidency and us using tear gas on babies and things like that. Like, is it going to be another thing to go along with like the Trail of Tears and the mass slaughter of Native Americans and their children? Like there's whenever things like this come up, it's often posed in the concept of like the counter argument's always like, well, like what, should I just feel guilty because I'm white? Because I didn't do it. Not even my parents did that. It's like I'm just American and white or whatever and so on. Like we've all heard that argument, that like this idea like I'm not gonna feel guilty for things I didn't do. Well, we're doing it now. Like that excuse is going away. Hooray. I don't know, next week we'll talk about fucking Mass Effect or something. I don't know. Ask me questions, please. I'm not even out of them, it's just this one became its own thing. I'm gonna go play Devil May Cry, where a shitty, cheesy ripoff of Rob Zombie music goes rah, 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 and I fight and I air juggle a zombie with guns, and knife wounds don't matter. Video game escapism, you guys. It's how we cope with the world around us being on fire, especially literally in my case sometimes. That's fun. I like that guy's very naked. Just right in this moment, an incredibly naked bull man just warps in like, hello, how are you doing? Goodbye. I'm gonna log out now.